Hi everyone, welcome to the MintMCP admin sessions. There, I think we're live. Yes, awesome. Yes, so good to see everyone this morning. Let me bring up my slide deck too. If you are joining right now, please feel free to drop in a nice hello message in the morning into the channel if you like to. There, very cool, awesome. Hey, yes, Bo, do you see my screen? Is it presenting?
Yes, I
Okay,
can. Yes, it is
awesome. Yeah.
clear.
Hey everyone. Yeah, please do join. Welcome to joining our webinar session. This is a session that we're going to talk about Slack agents, Coworker agents, Claude Tag, and so on. Nice to have everyone here. If you are here, please like to everyone to just say hi in the channels. We'd like to this to become a little bit of a community of people that we bring together to chat about all things AI. And I think maybe the most exciting thing for me this week has been there's actually models out there like Kimi 3 today or the yesterday release. And I think we're starting to see open source models really catch up to where closed models are. And super excited to try the Kimi tree model over this weekend. And if you're doing that too, love to exchange notes on that. Yeah, but we're gonna get started right away. And then for this session, me and Bo, we're gonna be talking a little bit about a few things about multiplayer Slack agents, what shift we are seeing happening. We'll be talking about Claude Tag and showing you how Claude Tag works, how it can be used with MintMCP, and also some of the tips and tricks that we found in Claude Tag. So if you have any questions about using that and things you run into, let us know. And then we also cover at a high level what are the Mint Coworker agents feature is like. It's a bit similar to Cloud Tag in some ways, but also comes with very powerful, significant differences there. Cool. Yeah. Some people coming in, please feel free to ask questions in the chat and do Q&A. All right, so we're going to get started today. So the big shift that many of us are seeing is really going from single player to multiplayer Slack agents. And I think with the shift here that we are seeing is that the instead of having each individual be in front of their cursor, ChatGPT or Claude window and doing things alone in isolation, when we move the activities of using AI agents into a shared system where everyone can see it, be it Microsoft Teams or Slack, this is where magic really happens because every individual in a company can see how everyone else is using it. There's a very quick osmosis of what's possible. And not only that, if this is done right, you start to get threads or conversation where it's not just one person interacting with the agents. You start to see many people interacting simultaneously with the agents there. So this is really cool. And this is something that you guys might have seen talking to us when we show you our Slack agents. Many of you might have seen Max. Max is one agent in our company that does a lot of GTM work for us. And more recently, on the Claude side, Anthropic, they launched up Claude Tag, which is a singular agent Claude inside Slack. So one of the questions that comes up for us is really like, how do these things actually work? What's happening behind the scenes with them? And sometimes it's a bit opaque to most people on like the architecture and what happens there. So over here, I thought we'll start by sharing a little bit about how this actually works, how to think about it, and some of the systems can be managed. So the architecture for Cloud Tag is really pretty simple. It's at the core of it, there is an agent environment that has a memory which Claude owns. And also behind the scenes, it actually runs Claude code. And we'll see that in live demo later. And in that environment that it runs in, this is like a little sandbox that Claude will spin up for every session or every thread in there. You can then interact with that environment through Slack bidirectionally by talking to it or getting results back. I believe Claude also supports some degree of scheduled jobs to be able to interact with that too. What's interesting about how this was designed from the Claude Tag architecture was that they have opted to use API keys to connect to all the end systems. So there are pros and cons of that. One pro of that is that it gives you like incredible amount of flexibility, but the con of that is that it's actually really hard to manage and guardrail the API keys that I use in there. So happy to show you what this looks like in the Claude Tag system in a second there. And again, if any guys have any questions on this, please post in the channel. Love to hear what you have to say and happy to walk and do trade-offs of all of this different approaches. So one thing that we started to look into this, my team has and I have been looking into how Mint fits into this picture a lot too. And the one thing that we actually think hard about is how do we really control and govern what these systems do. So it turns out that when you go directly from API keys to a system like Claude or Cursor, or in this case Claude Tag, there a lot of things disappear, right? The things that we care about on what is it actually doing with the API keys, what tools are being called, what endpoints are being used, what data is flowing, is there an audit of the actions? If everything is going direct through API calls, none of these is going to be available for you, and the key management is actually really hard as well. And so one of the things that works really well, it turns out in Claude, is using the Mint agent identity as a way to connect into Claude Tag, and use that as a way to negotiate the underlying access to things there. So I'm going to show you that quickly and how that reflects in the Mint environment as well. I'm going to show you, yeah. And then as I'm going through this, feel free to post questions and all in here too. So this is so in this picture, actually, maybe I'll first show you guys a Claude tag first. So if you guys are administrators in your Claude environment, you now have in organization settings a new button here called Claude tag in beta. And in Claude tag, this is where you set things up. Right. So over here, you see which channels it can access, what Slack it can access. And one thing that you can do is to set up what we call access bundles in Claude Tag. And access bundles are in some ways like a kind of a group of things that Claude can access that are assigned to maybe a channel or multiple channels in the system. In this setup here, I've already created a Mint Connect access bundle to show you what this looks like. So in the Mint Connect access bundle I created, there's one Mint connection, but you can also see the default connections here that Claude comes with. For example, you can connect to Airtable, and you notice that when you click on it, the default options here are always access tokens and API keys. So if I went to, for example, if I went to Ahrefs against API key, and the idea here is that they are putting out there a mode to use this where it's really just API key based, and now we're relying on the API keys to do any kind of guardrailing, which, depending on the system you work with, may or may not be possible. So one way to use Mint around that is that you could use Mint, and at the bottom there's something called Add Custom Tool, and you can connect to it. Right, and this is how I got Mint connected into Claude Tag. So let me show you on the Mint side how this looks and then come back here. So the Mint side, we have something called agent identities that many of you have seen right now. And these are the ability to create identities for agents that connect to systems like Claude, Hermes, OpenClaw, different things in there. And in my demo here, I've created an agent identity for Claude Tag to use. I've connected it to a few systems like DeepWiki, Exa, Linear, and so on. You get all the same controls through Mint on the tools you can use. So what you can enable, disable through all of them. I'm going to leave this as a demo to leave them on. You get the same middleware abilities. And more interestingly, you get the ability to delegate credentials in here. So you can connect, either through a delegated service account, personal account, and have this be a single pane to manage all of that to the different end systems. Now, what you get in Mint is that on the agent setup page, you actually get different ways to connect to the different agentic systems. So over here, if you notice this, you can now create a agent API authorization, where one of these keys in here that can be created can now be used with Claude. And the endpoint in here will be the endpoint used with Claude Tag. So if I were to flip back to Claude right now and look at this, this is where I think the setup on the Claude side has actually been a little bit more complex than it needs to be. But just show you how this looks. I would actually come in here, copy the URL to the allowed websites. And interestingly enough, this should only be the domain here. Yeah, I'm going to call this connect to. So I might delete this later after I create it just as a demo. Then I'll paste in the bearer token that I get from the API key. So this is it's the one that you get when you create key. You won't see the full one. I won't see the full one now, but I'm going to just copy this just to show you like what this looks like. So I'll copy this and paste this in here. Right. And this sets up the connection to Mint. And then it says that every time Claude sends a request to this website, it actually is going to add this header. And that gives Claude Tag the ability to authorize itself into Mint. Interestingly enough, after you set this up and connect, uh, the other UI to configure this only shows up after it's connected when you click on Options and Edit. So there's a thing to do called path prefixes. And this UI, for some reason, only shows up after you connect it. And over here, this is where you put in the path prefix for the MCP endpoint. So for this particular prefix, O MCP demo organization, Claude Tag MCP, this corresponds exactly to the path prefix here, MCP server URL, and then you can put it in there, and then that gets in there. So I think there's a bit of a UI feedback we're giving to the Anthropic folks, but you only get to this particular page after you add it and you click on the three dots and edit connection. This is the same for all the connections. Some of these options are only available after the fact when you connect them. So this is really all you have to do to connect Mint. There's a few other things in here that we notice. Claude has a specific access policy on domains, and it's quite inconsistently applied right now. Sometimes it's applied, sometimes it's not. And so we found that it's actually important to add any domain you want the Claude tag to access in this allowed domain list in here. And so this is something that we noticed that it worked the first time without this, and the second time around we had to add this in for it to work again. And then finally, in the instructions, Claude Tag, because of its preference to do direct API calls, you actually need to tell Claude Tag a little bit of instructions on how to use Mint. And this is some of the instructions that we have in here. And giving these instructions help Claude Tag understands a little bit more on the way it connects to it. All of these things are documented in our documentation. And so later we'll be, after this webinar, we'll be sending that to the channels and so that you guys have it so they can look at it too. So don't worry about that. Yep. So all in all, this sets up a bundle in here. And I'm hoping that, one day Claude will do the MCP stuff with Claude Tag correctly. Till that happens, this is how we do it now. We then go to Claude Tag here. And this is where you now set up Claude Tag access into your Slack environment, right? So over here, you would connect your Slack in, you connect your organization into Slack, and then you can connect one or more channels into the Claude Tag environment. And after you do so, you have to connect the access bundle into the environment there. So one of the things in here that we notice is that the Claude Tag setup isn't actually refreshing access bundles very well. So if you do change the access bundle, you may need to disconnect everything and reconnect it. And this is because Claude Tag doesn't actually pick up new access bundle configurations after it's configured. So right now, treat it as like you got to get this right at the beginning. If not, you might get into a lot of edge conditions with Claude Tag, regardless of the connectors you're connecting with. Yeah, it's been a bit of a frustrating journey to get this working, but this is kind of what we found so far. Okay.
So a question that Jaren asked is, what's the benefit of connecting a Mint agent identity to Claude Tag versus just the traditional Mint Slack agent with bundled connectors?
We'll get to that, Jaren. Really good questions in there. So I'm going to walk through the Claude Tag stuff, show how it works, and then actually I'll come back later and discuss the Mint agents and how that compares to Claude Tag, and maybe that'll give you a little bit of sense of where the differences come in, and why you might want to choose one over the other. There. Okay. So with this Claude Tag setup in here, I'm going to now flip over and share my other screen where I can show you how this actually works in practice. So after that connects into um, the session in here, so now you can actually start asking Claude things like, let's see here. Using the Mint connection, do you have what tools are available? And normally start with this just to make sure it's picking it up. This would connect. You can see it here. Claude Tag is running. It's finding all the tools we connected earlier from the four different systems. And over here, earlier before the call, I actually got it to come in here and try to get the LinkedIn tool to get the work email for myself. And so you can see this is all working right now. And so, for example, now I should be able to also do things like, can you get the list of linear issues as well? Right, so I can do that as well. So now Claude is able to get in there, start looking around, and really pulling out the data on the systems there. Right, so the Interesting thing about this so far is that I'll say every single Claude Tag session does correspond to a specific Claude code session, and sometimes the session that corresponds to the exact session inside Claude Tag is a bit hard to predict sometimes. So I think one thing to note is that sometimes you might find that this thread is one session, but if you were to message in here, um, can you get the work email for Bozi who works at MintMCP? A message like this could also end up in the same session as this session. So do expect that the session mapping for Claude Tag to be one that is a little bit hard to predict at the moment, is what we discovered. And the best way to figure out what's going on is to click on the little links in here that will bring you to the actual session that's running inside Claude Tag in there. So if I went back in there and look at this right now, I can actually see back in now in the Cloud Tag environment, this is actually running a task in here that's doing both the linear issues, work email, but in this case, you can notice that both of those messages that I send, despite being one in a thread and one in the channel, are actually ending up in the same exact session that Claude Tag is using to run the task. Right. So this tends to confuse many people a little bit, including ourselves, and we found that that unpredictability is something that you got to deal with if you're using Claude Tag in there. Yes, and I think Jared also mentioned that there's a lot of black boxness happening in here that makes it actually really hard to understand what's happening. And the second thing that we have noticed, is that there's a lot of sub-agentic use. So if you look at this and look at the agent use in here, Claude Tag tends to like to spin up a ton of sub-agents. And on top of that, it also likes to react to lots of things. So every single message you send in the channel, every time you react on a post, everything becomes an additional message to Claude. And that can quickly increase your token spend massively. And so we actually internally we no longer run Claude Tag experiments on anything above Sonnet. Anything on Opus just blows through credits like no tomorrow. So everything we do here is on very small models just to make sure it works too. There we go. So this is running, and then Cloud Tag, because of how it's set up to use direct APIs, it actually has to try a lot harder because the MCP tooling around this is not in there directly yet. Right, so this is actually going through and finding Bo's email right now, and then on the flip side, you see it work too. Yep, cool. Yeah. Any other questions from anyone else in the room so far? So this is like very high level, how to get all of this working. I would do caution that Claude Tag does require a bit of tuning, regardless of the connectors you use to get it working. And we found it to be okay so far, I would say, but not a great experience. Yeah, cool. Okay, if there are no, yeah, feel free to bring any questions in there. And if I'm going too fast, let me know too. Just reach out in the chat and let me know what you're looking there. So all of these things I'm showing you today is also available in our documentation site. So later post meeting, we will send out a link to this page if you'd like to try it out. Cloud Tag is definitely very much in a beta product, so lots of rough edges there that we are encountering, as is everyone else trying to get there. Okay, so that's Cloud Tag, and so cool. So this is Claude Tag, and then so our hope is like we'll be working with Claude Anthropic a lot to figure out how this flows can be much better. But I wanted to also cover a little bit about Jaren's question on the benefit of using Mint Identity with Claude Tag versus how about using the Mint workers directly with the Mint agents instead, right? So one of the things that we notice in Cloud Tag is that the two boxes inside the agent environment is something that you've very little control over. Just as Jared is mentioning in the chat, there is a very much of a black box on how Claude actually manages the agent memory, and then the choice of harness and model on how Claude actually delegates the work, runs a sub agent, is actually really confusing as well, and has been tuned to do a lot of nested recursive tasks that isn't needed for a lot of more simpler tasks that we run into day to day. So right now, what we're looking at is that can we have an environment instead of having that control be delegated away? What would we look like if we controlled, our customers, you guys had more control over the agent memory, and there was also more control over the harness and model. So the Mint Coworker agent side of things gives you that kind of flexibility in there. And on top of that, what we've done here is that instead of having a lack of observability because you're using just pure API keys, if you're going through an agent monitor that's looking at all the calls being made, all the bash tools being run, you also get observability into the models and harnesses used behind the scenes in here. Cool. And then Shafiq had a good question in here too that came in, which is there any agent runtime configuration in the future? So the answer is actually yes. And in fact, later I'll do a quick view of the agents inside Mint, and then we'll show you the different runtime options and also the different model options. And so I think with the introduction of models like GLM 5.2 or Kimi 3 yesterday, I think we are now in a mode where using a harness like maybe Pi, Claude with these models may actually be a very cost efficient and also very sovereign way to run things that you have more control over all the things behind the scenes and no one can take that model away from you in the future. Cool. Okay, so this is one half of the Mint Coworker agents. I think the other half of the Mint Coworker agents is the thing that you already are familiar with, which is agent identity MCPs. So in the Mint Coworker agents framework, what we did maybe a bit differently here was to have data access be really guarded by MCPs. So rather than giving API keys to every single agent and trying to manage that, it is much easier to manage it if you have MCPs, and you can get very granular on the controls. So, most API keys are very broad control. Is it read? Is it write? But they don't go down to the details. Okay, it's read, but read only these things and not that things, right? And I think over here, this is where some of the other controls you get through the MCP stuff helps a lot in that process there. Cool. So the other thing that we're noticing as well is that when you start to move to a model where you're doing multiplayer AI, you start also think about having multiple agents that have different access. And multiple agents can actually be in a Slack channel and collaborate. And this actually turns out to be particularly useful when you're on different models. If you run one of the agents, say on Claude, and another agent on Codex or Pi, because of the differences in how the models are trained, we actually see a lot of differences in the outcomes of the work in here, and something that we actually have used a lot ourselves. So as an example of like how this looks in practice, when you have two models actually on different, two agents on different models, you get a bit of a view like this, where this is actually an internal snapshot or something that we are working on, a bunch of CDC cockroach type enhancements with our data analysis. And so you can see in this particular example, the two agents, Sam is working on something, and Sam is actually using Codex on GPT 5.6 Soul. And then over here, Dan is actually using Cloud Opus 1.8. And because the models are trained very differently, we actually see the interaction between the two agents, tagging each other, becoming a very interesting way for them to collaborate, where one, the entire collaboration is in the clear, so you can see it in Slack. And number two, because of the training differences, GPT tends to be a very nitpicky, precise model. Whereas Opus tends to be a bit more of a creative model. They actually work really well together to get things done better, where two of them almost always find issues in each other's work. And so when they converge and say this is working really well, we know that the outputs are really good there. Cool. Yeah. Any other questions from people like Jarwin and Shafiq? Please do post in the channels too as we keep going. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to flip here and give everyone a quick update on some of the coworker agent stuff that's been in Mint, and also talk a little bit about some things that you can try right away. So over here, I've we have Claude Tag created, and it's actually now one of the identities in here. In the Mint system, you can create coworker agents with different identities as well. And over here, creating them will actually create different agents that are in the system sorry, take this, that have their own, similar ways of instructions on what they do. They have their own. memory files on what they remember. They have their own files on what they store. They have their own workspaces on how they work as well. And then they have their own sub agents. And then for the connector side, instead of making it really complex, we need to configure lots of API keys. Because it's part of the Mint system, you can click connect here and you're able to add, say, a particular existing agent identity bundle to this one. So in this case, for example, I could potentially add the Claude Tag bundle directly to this agent here, and immediately the entire setup is done, and that agent gets the configurations he needs in there.
So Jaren asked a very relevant question.
Mhm.
Looping in another agent works today, right? Just write the instructions for when to do so in Claude.nd.
Really good question in there. So two things in there. One is that the settings for this, right now, the thing that we've been looking at and tuning up is how do we control which agents can tag another agent? And you can see
Yeah.
this being a kind of a risk here you get into. If two agents can tag each other, will they end up in an infinite loop conversation and just spend all our tokens and not want to do that, right? And so over in the system in Mint, there are ways that you can configure the settings so that the potential tagging chain only goes in the ways that are approved. Right. So for example, you can say, hey, Dan can tag Sam, but Sam cannot tag Dan. Right. So there are ways, number one, to set it up. And number two, I think is once you do that, I think that's pretty much all you have to do. So by default, the agents are not able to tag each other, but once you enable that setting in there, which we can share the instructions for, they will be able to do that. And then I think for us on our end, we're looking into how we can avoid um, any kind of things around uh, things like looping and things like this. Now over here, I think Shafiq had a question about harnesses. So I wanted to show you this too, where now in a different runtime harness, we do support multiple harnesses right now. So there's the Claude Agent harness that we do support. There's also the Codex harness that you can use. And we have been finding that the Codex harness has actually been pretty good in many different tasks. And on top of that, not only do you have your choice of harnesses here, which will be adding more, we also have your choice of provider right now. So if you like to use the Anthropic API, by default, that's available. Many customers are also on Bedrock, that's available. And maybe what's more exciting today is that you can also put in a custom Anthropic compatible endpoint, and that's then make it available. So we have tested this with the Fireworks endpoint for GLM 5.2. It works, but does need require a little bit of tuning on the instructions for the agents. And I mean, this few days, you'll probably be excitedly trying out Kimi tree and see if Kimi tree is actually a model that exceeds Opus. And if it does, then that has really given us an avenue to get all these capabilities without being too coupled towards Claude and Anthropic there or OpenAI. Cool. So I think any other questions for me? Anyone else in this room in here? There. Cool. Awesome. Yiping has a good question there too. And then, oh, and ambient mode as well. So, two
Yes.
questions in there. So, skills here are shared across all the different agents. In this particular repo that I'm demoing in, apparently there's no skills found, but they are shared across all the agents inside the GitHub organization here. Yeah, so this particular agent does share the skills with everyone else. And the second one, I think, is that the memory of the agents are something that you own, in this case, in the Git repo. So you have a lot of control over how that looks. Jared has a question on ambient mode. So I'm going to see if ambient mode is a setting in here. I think we've enabled it. There we go, ambient. So ambient mode is a very new feature that we are making possible right now with all the agents as well. So this is a ability for the agent to listen on any thread that it has been tagged in without directly at mentioning it. This is something that we have done as well, and there's a ambient classifier where you're able to tune the instructions for, and then it's able to actually start to classify the instructions as well. Right. So this is something that you can look at as well in there. Right. So let's see if yes, good question there. Jaren's like, does this listen in the thread or channel? Right now, this only listens on the threads is tagged in. And then maybe the one design decision that we have done on the Mint side for the Coworker agents is that every thread that an agent is in, every thread actually corresponds to a different session. So rather than have the sessions be something that's a bit unpredictable, we want every thread to have its own session that starts and end. and it will be picking up all the details of all the changes in your setup, if there's any, right away immediately there. Yep. The experiences of using the Coworker agents, in Slack is actually very similar to what you saw in Claude Tag. So I'm going to skip that. I think many of you might have seen that demo before with us. So we
Sure.
experiment with this. But I wanted to maybe also share a few other tips in here before we end off the session. And there, so we'll share this slide deck with everyone too. So if you're using Claude Tag, just be aware of a few things about the unpredictability of sessions, access bundles. Ambient mode in Claude Tag is very aggressive because their classifier pretty much lets everything in. And then cost is also tends to be pretty high there. And then if you're looking at the Mint version of it, please reach out to us. Happy to help you get set up on this. Over there, I think the main things to really think about is how do setting the agents up should be pretty fast, like 5-10 minutes. And then after that, creating a GitHub repo for the memory makes it easy for you to manage all the memories of the agents in there. Cool. With that, would love to get any other questions for people in here. I'll also happy to dive into any other demos on the Mint site if that's helpful. Yeah, see if anyone else has any questions for me here. Yeah. Bo, have you seen anything interesting on your end on the agentic stuff so far?
Uh, I think some of the customers that are coming to us and starting to see this wants to really deploy this within their tools, and want to deploy this within their environment as well. And as part of that, what I do see is that they start off with something really small, like, oh, can we actually use this to do documentation similar to what we did? Or can we use this to monitor certain customer channels? And then they grow from there. And that has been interesting because then you start being able to disseminate this to the rest of the org and saying, oh, this is what an experience like this looks like. And then you start seeing people like rolling and saying like, okay, I want to create this agent beyond that as well. We do see customers who are using Claude Text having a lot of issues, to be fair. And as a result of that, they are seeing like what other easier like ways they can use Mint to kickstart the process to create one of these agents. So Claude has been hard for them. So do let us know if you run into any issues as well with Claude Tech, we can help.
Yeah, so happy to help you in both, and then maybe on
Yeah.
that, it's like I'll end on this note there too. Many of you have been probably interacting with Minty, in the Slack channels that we work with you on. And so it turns out that Minty, if it's not, if something that you probably have noticed this, is that Minty is actually one of the Mint agents inside the system. And so, if I was in over here saying, say, Minty, post this, Minty, say, hello. When you actually talk to Minty inside the ecosystem in our Slack environment, Minty is actually when it responds one of the agents inside the setup right now. And so this has been a really nice experience that I think many very helpful agent for many of you right now. And so over there, when I sent the message to Minty, say hello, you can see that it corresponds to exactly this task in progress right now. And then later, as this runs, you actually get a nice breakdown of the model used, the turns, the costs at the end of it too. And then you can see that every single message to Minty appears as a different message in here, a different session in here in the system as well. Right. So this is something that we're set up there. And so if you have enjoyed working with Minty, Minty is one of these things that you can start thinking about like internally, like how do I have bots like this that answer internal questions? And we're happy to help you figure out some of these things as you try to onboard your team to this. Mhm.
One interesting agent that I've created recently is an employee helper agent. So employees do come to me for a lot of information, like, oh, where can I ask? Where can I get this healthcare benefit thing? Where can I actually like order lunch and so on and so forth? So like the agent that I have built to help answer some of these questions has been super helpful for me. And I'm going to be deploying it live as a HR tool.
Got it. Yeah, cool. Blake actually has a great question on using agents outside of GitHub. So it turns out that maybe on two things in here. So GitHub is actually where the agent's configuration and memory is stored. And then the agents actually do run outside of it. And what you can do in here is that you can do connectors from any of these agents to external systems. So as an example of that, like I believe, for example, Facebook right now has an MCP server for you to connect Facebook ads to. There's also other servers like this where you can now connect through MCP servers that are external. And then if you're doing anything in paid marketing, I'll say start exploring and seeing if there are MCP servers that are available for the data. You can now start designing agents around that, have that data systems be connected via the MCP gateway, and now you can have a Slack agent that manages all of that for you. Awesome. Good questions in there. Yeah, please keep any questions coming. Maybe it's a quick response in here. Like, um, and many of you looking into some of these Slack agents. If you are, I know Jaron has been doing a lot of it. Maybe we'll do. I'd love to have Jaron on next time as a demo in here to show how he does it. But if any one of you in this group here are starting to explore and look at this, do reach out because we love to have you guys show what you're doing, exchange notes. And I think this multiplayer AI world is coming to us very quickly, much faster than we anticipated as well. And we're seeing a lot of interest in across our customer base in adopting this. Cool. Okay, that sounds great. If no one has any other questions, I think we might be at the end of this webinar. Um, And then we'll probably, it sounds like Jaron has volunteered himself, so we might see him in the next one.
Yeah.
But so glad to have all of you here. And then if you do run into any issues in the Mint Coworker agents or the Claude Tag setup, do reach out. We'd like to see, help you guys navigate and make sure that all of these things are working as you start moving towards adopting some of this technology there. Cool. Awesome. So that's all we have for you today, and hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.